Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Brownstein. Of course, all of you should know that already. Um, Welcome to another lecture in the series on public speaking. Today, we're going to be reviewing common errors and mistakes that people make during public speaking and things that you can look out for when giving your speeches. So, of course, as usual, there's a little bit of a lag between my presentation and the YouTube feed. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will do my best to answer them for you. So, let's get started. First thing, let's review what happened in our last class, everything that we talked about, and get you all prepared for this one. So let's make sure everybody's online. Yeah, looks like we're good to go. So first, let's review. Last week we talked about visual aids. So for first off, there's many different types of visual aids, uh, not just PowerPoint presentations. I know I use them a lot, but there are many, many different types of visual aids. Charts, objects, multimedia, so audio visual, PowerPoint, etc. The next piece of advice when you're using your visual aids is to maintain eye contact with your audience. The visual aids are important. You certainly will look at them, but your primary focus should not be on your visual aid. Your primary focus should always be on your audience. Because as a public speaker, again, your main job is to focus on eliciting an emotional response from the audience, which you can't do if you're not looking at them. And that is especially important. So a speaker should never turn their back on an audience. Don't turn your back on an audience. Walk sideways, turn sideways. Don't turn your back completely to an audience. It's a sign of disrespect to your audience if you turn your back on them. Next piece of advice, practice with your visual aids. Don't just assume that they work. Just because you've worked with PowerPoint doesn't mean that you know how to properly work with a model. Um, it's an entirely different skill set to work with a small piece of equipment than to work with a large piece of equipment. So showing off a cup and showing off a Xerox multifunction printer, for example, are two very different things and require practice when moving around them properly, interacting with them, etc. So your visual aid should supplant your speech. It should not be your speech. The visual aid is a tool. It is not the basis. Um, Sorry about that. Um, your visual aid is, again, a tool. It's something that should not be the primary focus because without the visual aid, you should still be able to give your speech. With the with the visual aid, your speech is only enhanced. So, apologies for that. I don't know why people were interrupting, but sometimes it happens. So, um, next, some things to consider. Have you considered your logistics? For example, if you're using something small, can everybody see it? We talked last week about Steve Jobs and the introduction of the iPhone, blowing it up on a large screen to make sure that everyone had the ability to see everything that was happening on a very small device. Are all of the electronics working? So, are you connected to the internet? Do you have your videos queued up? Is everything set up to work properly? And then focus on doing that before the speech begins. Even if you're making last minute changes to your presentation, make sure that you've made sure that all those changes are done so that you don't try to do them during your speech. Um, Point out key elements of any visual aid. So if you have a large, complicated chart, if you have a detailed graph, then you want to point out the most important parts of it, especially if it's complicated. Anytime you have anything on the screen, people will assume that it's important. You should be focused on explaining to people what they need to take away from the presentation. Um, Next, try to avoid distributing information before the speech. If you have pamphlets to give out, if you have information that you want people to look at, make sure that people are given all of that after the speech. If they're given it before the speech, they're likely to spend their time more with the materials than focusing on you and your speech and the presentation that you're giving. Remember, you control the presentation. Don't let it control you. PowerPoint should not be the focus. It should not be the main feature of your presentation. The feature of your presentation should be you. That should be the focus of your audience, not on, for example, a PowerPoint presentation. Now, we have it a little differently here. This is a webinar format, so I had to rely a little bit more on PowerPoint, but you should be focusing on me and the stories that I'm telling, as opposed to um, what everything that's on the PowerPoint presentation, because the PowerPoint gives you just a little bit of information, and what's coming from me is substantially more information. So next, some tricks. Again, when using PowerPoint, use bullet points. Don't use full sentences. People will not like to read full sentences. Um, this keeps it short and sweet. You don't typically want long um, strings of sentences per bullet point. You can do that for quotes, which we'll see a little bit later on. But for quotes and especially important materials that you want to use that need to be written in full. But aside from that, again, you can use a short bullet point and then tell a larger story based on that. Don't get overly fancy with PowerPoint presentations. There's no need to make the graphics do tons and tons of goofy, crazy stuff. It's nice every once in a while, but again, it's not something that should be, um, words and other things should not be flying all over the screen. Don't jump back and forth between your slides. Organize your speech so that it's done, in order. If you move past the slide, try not to go back. You can, but it's not recommended. Um, so that's from last week. That's everything that that's pretty much a lot of what we covered last week in terms of your presentation materials, in terms of everything that you need to know when dealing with presentation materials. So, what are we going to talk about today? Today, we're going to kind of overview a lot of the things that mentioned from time to time during the various presentations. Like I mentioned before, so much of my presentations will overlap from one another. But today, we're going to go into common errors and mistakes in more detail. The big thing to remember here is you can make mistakes, and we'll talk more about that. These are just things for you to keep an eye on, things for you to watch out for. Um, Common mistakes among lots and lots and lots of speakers. So let's get started. First, the first common error and mistake that people can make is using small scale movements and gestures. Um, As a public speaker, people can be afraid to take up too much space. It's a sign that somebody's very nervous. You'll see hunched over shoulders, you'll see people getting as small as they can. It's a defense mechanism. And people also do that with their small scale gestures. It looks like twitches. Um, when you sit very small, it comes across as hesitance and like an apology to the audience that you're there. Um, it's something, again, I used to do, rolled over shoulders, um, a nervousness about why I was up there in the first place. Um, it's your show when you're the public speaker. When you're the public speaker, you're in charge, it's your world. Make sure that you um, are using your space. We want to appear as public speakers confident. We want to appear in control, knowledgeable. We want to appear that we're there for a reason. Even if we're not confident in that ourselves, we want to portray that kind of confidence to our audience. So, next, speaking with low energy. Many people do this. Many people will speak with very, very low energy. They don't feel confident in what they're talking about. They don't want to. Um, they don't want to seem overly eager. They don't want their kids to get, um, drawn back. However, when you speak with low energy, you come across as uninvolved, uninteresting, and unenthusiastic. Why are you there? Why would you be selected as the public speaker if you don't care about your subject? This is again not to say that you have to run around on stage flailing your arms wildly and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But if you're not interested in your topic and that comes across to your audience, I mean, if you as the speaker, as the expert, if you don't care, why would they care? Um, Ultimately, you command less attention and project less confidence and charisma. Uh, you may take some time to get into the flow of the speech. The energy may increase. The more comfortable you get. It's very common among new speakers that, it takes a few minutes for them to get into the flow of their speech. And once they do, the energy picks up. And when the energy picks up, they become more excitable and they project that emotion, that excitement to their audience. Next, playing it safe. And most people don't think of this as a risk. The focus is generally, well, I'm not really going to try anything new. This is a mistake a lot of people make. They give one very good speech and then they just try to duplicate that over and over and over again. Like I mentioned in the very first class, there's no one way to give a speech. Um, One thing to consider, not taking a risk is also taking a risk. Um, it's something that sometimes as music fans, I know I lament when my favorite band branches off and starts doing something new. I'm like, no, go back to the old stuff. I really liked the old stuff. But the people who don't evolve and try new things and experiment with new kinds of information, with new kinds of techniques and styles, they ultimately get boring and people lose interest. So if you choose never to try something new, keep in mind that's a big risk in and of itself. Um, when your presentation content is too safe, if you're not willing to try new things, to push the boundary, um, it usually comes across as boring. Now, when I say push the boundary, I don't mean insulting. Well, I guess you could insult people during your speech, but I don't mean pushing it too far. Um, Talking about offensive comments or inappropriate materials based on your audience. Uh, I'm not talking about pushing it and doing that. I'm not talking about shock jocks, as many radio hosts used to be referred to Howard Stern, for example. I'm talking about presenting material in various ways so that you're always pushing yourself. Some of the things that you'll try will work, and you'll integrate those things into your traditional speaking style. Some of them won't work, and you won't integrate them anymore. That will be the learning process that you have. Next, and this is a big one, not preparing enough. It is not simply enough to prepare your media. It's not simply enough to develop your PowerPoint presentation, to choose your videos, to pick out all of the proper props and other things that you want to use. You need to be incredibly prepared for any presentation that you give. Remember, you're the expert. Experienced speakers do plenty of research so that they feel confident in their material and their ability to respond to any question. The vast majority of your time as a public speaker should not be spent giving the speech. That should be maybe a third of the overall time that you spend on the speech in its entirety. Um, I give as well for our electronic democracy project a series of webinars on corruption. The vast majority of my time is spent reading, is spent understanding the topics, understanding the various things that are happening within the sphere, keeping up on current events, talking about various articles, various authors that I hadn't previously known. It's a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of research. My speech will last for 40 minutes. My prep time lasts significantly longer. And for anyone giving a presentation, it should be the same thing. If you have a question and answer session, you should be able to answer questions. And you can't do that if you only know the information in your speech and are not aware of any other information. It's important, very important, to go through multiple drafts or iterations of your material. Um, that way, when you give your speech, you've worked out the kinks. You've done your practicing. You've seen what works and what doesn't work. And perhaps your preparations were incorrect. Perhaps something that you thought would work didn't work. That's okay. That is not a problem. Those things happen. The greatest speakers, public speakers in the world, from time to time, they lay an egg. They just have a very poor speech. It happens. It's nothing to freak out or worry about. I've given plenty of bad speeches, um, but my goal is to give significantly more great speeches than bad speeches. And a big part of that is practicing those speeches. I've given these presentations already several times. I'm very familiar with the material and I've given the presentations before. But each time there are tweaks and changes that are made and that are worked towards in order to make sure that the next time I give the presentation is the best version of the presentation itself. Preparation is hugely important. We went through preparing for your speech. It's important to do every single time to fully know how the speech works. Next, avoiding vulnerability. Many people, when they want to do a speech, they stand up on stage and they want to be perfect. They're afraid to make mistakes. They just want to do everything 100% correct. If you're trying really hard to seem perfect, savvy audiences will easily see through your act and become suspicious. Um, Even non-savvy audiences will inevitably see through it. It's like someone who smiles all the time. I'm an American. I smile a lot. It's something that my Ukrainian friends and colleagues took some time to get used to. But I don't always smile. It was something we noticed, something I noticed when I did sales. You never end up trusting somebody who smiles all the time. Even as an American, and I know we smile a lot, it's not they don't come across as genuine. They don't come across as honest. Um, I had one boss who was the epitome of this. He was an excellent sales rep, but I always felt like he was making it up as he went along. He was always smooth, always smiling, um, always, everything to a T. And he never came across to anyone as anything more than hot air. And that is not something that you want to express. That's not um, a vibe that you want to give off to your audience. They will ultimately reject that. Nobody is perfect. Not the public speaker. No one in the audience is perfect. You have to find ways to show vulnerability if you want to be seen as credible. Um, I may tell embarrassing stories about myself. I will tell stories about my failures as much as I'll tell stories about my successes because I learn from all of my failures. I learn what works, I learn what doesn't. I learn what works for me specifically, and I learn what doesn't work for me. And when that happens, my public speaking, my presentation skills improve. But I'm not afraid to say that, yeah, I've made mistakes, I've screwed up. And when you make those mistakes, when you make those admissions, you add that level of credibility that wouldn't otherwise exist. Next, a big mistake, data-centric presentations. Data is a big and complex issue. I've been learning since I started with my organization here in Ukraine how deep and complex data is. I never fully understood it. I still don't. Um, but I'm starting to at least understand the beginnings of how complicated the issue of data is. Data, though, is only that. It's only data. Your job as the speaker is to shape that data, is to turn that data into a human story. Um, if you focus on the data itself rather than the story behind the data, you're in trouble. Anybody can get access to data, but it's how we shape the data that we get that makes us great public speakers. Um, you can all read the quote that's on here, but ultimately it starts with what I like the most is it starts with the hard statistics, the math, and the analytics, all of that stuff. But it ends with the softest, which is how to tell the story. You need to tell, as a speaker, the story behind the data. The data is great, the data is valuable, and you want to use it, of course. However, it should not be the focus of your presentation. Data is wonderful and it is necessary, but it is not the end all be all. It should not be the focus of your presentation. I can't stress it enough. Data centric presentations are boring and forgettable. Your audience will remember the data, they will remember the information, but they won't remember who told it to them. They won't remember why it's important. They'll just leave with a bunch of new data. And as we talked about in previous lectures, people remember the speakers who evoke emotion. Data does not evoke emotion. It's the story that the data tells that evokes emotion. Emotion begets your call to action, what you want your audience to do. And that only comes through a story, through that emotional connection that you as the speaker make to your audience. Next, just like not preparing enough is a big mistake, not practicing enough is perhaps the single biggest mistake that you can make. Um, Many public speakers, after they give a couple of really great speeches, they'll have prepared, they'll have practiced, they'll have done everything right, and they'll go out and they'll give two, three, maybe four really good speeches because of all of the prep work that they did and all of the effort that they put in. And then they'll get lazy and they'll stop doing that. And they'll just assume that they've already mastered the skill of public speaking and they'll just kind of wing it. I made this mistake for sure. I have made this mistake, not practicing my speech enough. Now, I found ways that I like to practice my speeches, and that's what I do. But I got kind of cocky and I stopped practicing. And I just said, you know what? I'm good enough. I can give lots and lots and lots of speeches, no problem. And you may get lucky a couple of times and give a great speech without practicing. But I laid some massive eggs when I didn't prepare for my presentations, when I didn't practice my presentations, when I didn't work through my hand gestures, when I didn't work through my movement, when I didn't know what I was talking about. So when I would botch questions, especially easy questions, and we'll get to that a little later. But if you're not practicing, if you're not simulating your environment, if you're not choreographing movements, which you know that you need to have, when I was in sales and I would give printer presentations, I would literally work through the very basic things about the printer. I sold these big Xerox machines when I was living in San Diego. And I would practice. I would take the toner out of the machine and I would put the toner in the machine. I would take um, I don't even remember what all of the stuff, but I would open all of the trays. I would work through the interface so that I could do it quick, fast, and in a hurry. Here's how you make 100 copies here. Yeah, here's how you make it two-sided. Here's how you work in color. Here's how you make them black and white. Here's how you scan. Here's how you archive, etc. And I worked through those so that every time that I needed to do it, I just muscle memory. Just here's how you remove, here's how you put it back in, here's how you where you remove this, here's how you do it yourself, here's what this is, here's what that is, and I can move seamlessly through the machine. Um, and it's the same thing. It requires substantial amounts of practice. And it's always about practicing before every printer presentation. You walk into the room, you find the printer that you're going to be using. You make sure that everything slides in and out exactly like it's supposed to. You make sure that the machine is working. You print some stuff to it. You maybe make a couple of copies to make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to work. A couple of times the printer ran out of ink. Um, Fortunately for me, I caught that before the presentation started. So I was able to swap out the toner cartridge for a new cartridge. And it's those kinds of things with practicing that and with preparation that are so critically important. The other thing about practicing is that you recognize your areas of challenges, weak segues, awkward media transitions, etc. And you come up with ways to flow seamlessly through your material. That's how I learned about Alt Tab on the computer to quickly switch between slides, jumping from a presentation to a YouTube screen. It doesn't have to be, okay, now I'm going to escape. Now I'm going to use the mouse pad. I'm going to find the window that I want to have open. Everything's in its proper order, and I would just be able to quickly Alt Tab through my screens to make sure that everything was working properly. Preparation and practice are absolutely critical for any public speaker. If you're not practicing and you're not preparing, you're making the two biggest mistakes that you can make when speaking publicly. Um, just doing those two things will boost your confidence tremendously. Um, I haven't seen any questions yet. I have the live chat up, which is part of why I keep looking off screen. If you have any questions, please ask. These presentations are much more interesting when you ask questions that I can answer. So please, at any time, feel free. I will see them, and if I don't answer them immediately, I will answer them before the end of the presentation. So next, taking yourself too seriously. A lot of people think that they have to have their own self and their public speaking self. So, two completely separate people who act completely differently when they speak publicly, when they do presentations, and when they talk to their friends. Um, and ultimately, what you'll find is that that makes you less relatable. Anyone who knows me will tell you that the way that I'm talking to you now, this is how I act. This is simply me. This is how I am all of the time. Um, Sometimes I'm serious. Most of the time I'm a goof. But I like to have fun. I like to interact. I like to engage with the people that I work with. I have a big personality. I move around a lot. It's every if you know me, you know that that's the case. Um, don't defer too much to your audience. Don't look to them for all of the cues. Of course, you want to play off your audience, but if all you do is react to your audience and not show any of yourself, then it shows that the audience is at a higher level of importance than you are. Uh, so speak to your audience like you're an equal, like you're two people sitting around having a chat. Your audience will read that as confidence, not sitting and presenting yourself as some super superior person um, who takes themselves really seriously, but as someone that they can trust. I see Yvonne had a question. Yvonne, yes, all of the course presentations are available through the Electronic Democracy portal on YouTube where you're watching. They're all linked to a playlist where you can go on and access all of the presentations. Um, Either go through them all one after another or search by title and content. So, yes, they are all available through YouTube. If you can download them and save them on your computer, I'm not sure, but maybe you know YouTube better than I do. But you don't have to watch them live. You can simply go onto the YouTube portal and watch the presentations there. So thank you for the question. Glad I got one. So next, not having fun. Um, I love public speaking. I hated it when I first started, um, but now I love it. It's really fun for me. Um, so have a good time. If you know your presentation, if you know your materials, just have some fun. Um, that doesn't have to be your presentation style. Your presentation style doesn't have to be funny all the time. This presentation happens to be a little more serious, mostly because that's the mood that I happen to be in right now. I'm in a very efficiency mode, and my presentation reflects that. It's also partially because I'm giving my presentation over the internet and not giving my presentation in person. So the audience isn't there to laugh along with me. So I don't know who's laughing at what because you can see me, but I can't see you. So sometimes that will affect how you give your presentation. But that being said, I'm still enjoying myself. I still enjoy giving these presentations. I still enjoy doing this. So I'm having a good time. I'm enjoying myself. And that's really what's important when you're giving your speeches. Have a good time. Enjoy the process. Trust the process. Let your knowledge and your personality shine through. And when you feel like you're just chatting amongst friends, when you're engaging your audience on a more relaxed level, you'll start to enjoy yourself more, especially as you get used to the feeling um, of public speaking. You'll calm down, you'll relax, and just try and have fun. That's not the most important, but it's very important. Next, presenting too much material. Um, People tend to prepare a lot of material, um, typically much more than they need. Now, of course, as a public speaker, it's better to have too much than too little. However, when you do prepare too much information, you need to know what you are going to cut, what you're going to talk about, what you're not going to talk about, what you can breeze through quickly, and what you're going to want to spend more time on. Expect your presentation to take about 25% longer than you planned. Sometimes it can be 50%. Sometimes it doesn't expand any longer than you thought it would. Sometimes it goes exactly the length you thought it would be. However, that's going to be based in large part to the reaction of your audience. When your audience sees you giving a presentation and they respond to it, um, that's going to affect your reaction, right? If people said, well, how much material is, people start asking tons and tons of questions on one of the particular topics that I'm talking about. Well, that's going to require me to take time and answer their questions. Um, if that happens, then I need to be able to either expand the length of time that my speech is taking place or cut a significant amount of time from other topics. What can I avoid? What can I talk about? What can I not talk about? But that's in large part based on your audience. Um, when I do speeches in public and I'm speaking to a group that's not overly large, I love to engage my audience and force cooperation, force participation out of them. But I plan that time to be included in my speech. Our presentations so far haven't revealed a lot of questions, so I don't incorporate all of that time, mostly because I can't elicit the type of um, participation that I normally would giving the speech in person. So, of course, the question window is always open, people. You're welcome to ask questions, but make sure that you allocate enough time and that you plan your speech for what you can cut if something runs over. And again, practice on your feet, practice standing up, walking around, record yourself, video, record yourself, walk around, and time your speech. You may find that your speech itself, you think it'll take an hour, but when you practice it, you find that it only takes 35 minutes. Well, okay, I have about 25 minutes of time to fill in. We set up an hour for our presentations, and so far we're only at 40 minutes, so I may finish early, but that's okay. I plot out a specific amount of time, and I do my best to finish within that time frame. Next, rushing. Rushing through a presentation exacerbates any existing delivery or content problem you may already have. Don't rush. If you make a mistake, it's better to stop, take a deep breath, calm down, and start again, as opposed to trying to race through the presentation. If, for example, there were only 2 minutes left and I still had to get through this entire slide, better that I talk about one or two phrases on the slide and move on. Don't rush through. We talked about this with tempo. Um, Speaking fast shows lack of confidence, and we're always trying to convey confidence, um, knowledge of ourselves. There's a difference in understanding that confidence can mean vulnerability, being vulnerable to your flaws, but not accepting those as good enough reasons for people not to take you seriously. Um, Slowing down will make you seem poised and confident. Will also make you sound experienced. What you have to say is important, and people should take the time to listen to it. So slow down, take your time. It will make you appear much more confident, and that's critically important. We talked a lot about pauses before, so I'm not going to go into them in tons and tons of detail. Um, but pauses are fantastic. Always focus on your pauses. When do they? When are they used? When do you use them? When do they make the biggest impact within your presentation? Finally, yeah, the common error is, oh my God, I'm going to make all the mistakes in the world. Oh, it's going to be terrible. I'm going to screw this up and screw that up. Or, for example, you're giving your speech and you make a mistake and you go, oh, I made a mistake. Well, everyone makes mistakes, especially in public speaking. Public speaking is a nerve wracking, um, high stress environment. But you know what? Your audience already knows that. That's not a surprise to them. They expect you to make mistakes. And the fact that you make mistakes shows that you're not perfect. It shows that you are a normal person. You just have to be giving you happen to be giving a presentation. Your audience is your ally. Your audience is your friend. Nobody goes into a speech, at least I've never walked into a speech going, I hope this sucks. I hope this speech is just the worst thing I've ever heard, and that I sit there wanting to kill myself for an hour and a half. Oh, that would just be the greatest thing in the world. That doesn't happen. Your audience wants you to give a good speech. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it. Your audience will forgive you. That I promise you. Um, you know, there's a comedian Gallagher who sprays people with fruits and vegetables, and people still go watch his shows. Well, he does that on purpose. It's part of his show. But I mean, this is where your audience is. They come in for something fun and entertaining, and if a mistake is made, then the audience isn't going to worry about it and freak out. You may get laughed at a little bit if you fall off stage, or trip and fall down, but these things happen. The key is to identify a lesson learned and try to correct it next time. If you trip over wires on the stage, well, next time bring some duct tape with you and put tape over the wires, so that they stay flat to the ground. Make sure there are no wires on the screen or on the stage, excuse me. Make sure that you understand your space better. I didn't properly understand my space and I tripped over a wire. Your audience will forgive you. They'll laugh, but again, it's not gonna. Your audience will forgive these mistakes. They're really not big deals. Don't worry about them. Of course, always try and make yourself better, but don't sit and freak out regarding every little mistake that you may or may not make. Next, and this is another big one, blowing the easy questions. Um, the easy questions are the most important. Difficult questions, people know are difficult questions, and we'll get to those next. Easy questions, everyone should be able to answer. Um, if you watch, if you watch someone fumble an easy question, whew, it just makes them look horrible. They prepare so much for the deep and complex questions that they ignore the easy ones. And then you sit there, you can't answer an easy question, and you look as unprepared, even if you answer all of the difficult questions perfectly. If you fumble the easy questions, you're still going to look stupid or a little bit ridiculous. That you can answer these really difficult questions and not the really easy ones. So don't blow the easy questions. If you have an easy question, answer it. That's more important than answering on the moment with a long, detailed explanation for a difficult question. Make sure you know the answers to the easy questions. Take some time. If you take a deep breath, you don't have to answer instantaneously. You can close your eyes, take a deep breath, and answer the question. Oh, no, I'm just making sure that I get the right answer for you. That's more important than answering incorrectly. Um, if you watch someone answer an easy question incorrectly, it makes them look ridiculous. Next, not answering the question. Um, you should be ready and willing to answer the toughest questions head on. It's something our politicians, at least in the States, traditionally fail to do. They hate answering questions and they will answer either a different question or simply not answer the question. And it's infuriating for an audience. Absolutely infuriating. If you don't know the answer, that's fine. If you don't know an answer to an easy question, that's not good. If you can't answer what color the sky is, then okay, that's a problem. But if somebody asks you a detailed, complex question and you don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know, is an acceptable answer. People will go, okay, I asked a difficult question. Some people don't know the answer, or I'll have to look into that. I'll get back to you. If somebody asks me a question about public speaking that I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, and that I'll research and I'll get back to that. I'll get back to your question next time. There's nothing wrong with saying you don't know. What is significantly worse is getting caught lying or answering a question pretending that you know the answer, and then somebody else actually knows the answer and calls you out on it right when it happens. That is so much worse. Um, Getting caught lying is horrid for your reputation. Um, the more you lie, the worse your reputation tends to be. And if you do that, if you just make it up as you go along and don't know the answers to the questions, simply trying to answer the question can significantly hurt your reputation later on. So, those are some of the common errors, common mistakes that people make. That's the all the material that I'll be presenting today. If you have any questions, it doesn't look like the lag is too bad today. So if you have any questions, please feel free. Happy to answer them. Um, and if not, then I'll see you all on Tuesday for our next lecture. And I don't see any questions, but I'll give you guys 30 seconds or so more if you have any questions that you want to ask before we sign off. I guess not. Thank you all for your time. Have a great weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday.